Hi, everyone. Looks like we're starting right on time. We are really excited to have everyone here today for Chats from Home. We're going to hear from Aon's new president and CEO, Eric. And so we're really excited that you're all here. I am a moment behind, so give me just a second. All right, so first off, let me introduce myself. My name is Virginia Brown. I'm the Vice President of Advancement here at Aon. I'd love to know who else is joining us, and I'm sure everyone else would too. So please say hello. You can do that by typing in the chat window. When you do that, make sure to select a chat to everyone so that everyone can see who you are and say hello. I know that you're all excited to hear from Eric, but before we do that, I want to start by thanking our generous sponsors of today's event, Northeast Bank and Rental History Reports. We're so grateful for their support to make homes affordable in the Twin Cities and for all of us to be together today. And thanks to all of you joining us. Many of you are also supporting our important work. Together, we're making sure more families can afford their homes. And of course, feel free to make gifts today at aon.org/donate. All right, so here is how this is going to work if this is your first Chats from Home with us. I have a list of questions in front of me that were submitted in advance by many of you, and I'll feed those questions to Eric, and he's simply going to tell us what he knows and what he thinks and introduce himself to us a bit. Additional questions from those of you joining today are very welcome. You can put those in the Q&A. Please make sure to put them in the Q&A and not the chat, because my attention span is quite limited, and so I'll only be focusing on the Q&A for questions that you submit. If you are having any technical issues, let us know in the chat. It won't be me, but someone else from the Aon team will respond to you if you're having any trouble. I hope that we're able to get everyone's questions answered today, but if we do happen to run out of time and you've put your name with your questions, we'll make sure someone follows up to answer. And that, I think, is it for logistics, which means that it's time for the big event. Eric, do you want to come off of mute and show us who you are? I'd like to welcome Dr. Eric Anthony Johnson, Aon's new president and CEO. Eric is just wrapping up his first month at Aon, and of course is looking forward to chatting with us. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Virginia. Hello, everyone.
Awesome. Well, Eric, why don't we start with not exactly an easy question, it's sort of a big one. This one came in from Philip. Can you tell us a bit about what are your first priorities in your new role?
No, I really appreciate that question. Here are my priorities coming out of the gates at Aon. It's one, really understanding our portfolio and spending some time touring our existing properties, getting an understanding of what's existing in our portfolio, both from an opportunity perspective and a challenging perspective. Two, getting to know staff all throughout the organization, doing a lot of meet and greet calls across the community, government officials, policymakers, philanthropic individuals, meeting with donors, just having a lot of conversations. But I think, but I do know that going forward, we're going to be looking at a powerful strategic plan that will help guide our efforts over the next 10 years.
That's awesome. Well, I love that vision, and we're definitely going to talk a bit more about what you think is in store for Aon 2.0 with you, Eric. But can you also tell us a little bit about yourself? So not Aon, not anything else, but tell us a bit about who you are and where you're coming from.
Well, I'm just a regular guy. I may have all of this education and everything, but I'm a regular guy, born and raised in New Orleans. But what's important to me for people to know, this is not a job for me. I come from a lived experience in this background. I often tell the story. I moved 18 times before I turned 18 years old. And it was all about housing, trying to find stable housing. So for me, this is about passion. It's about connected to my soul and my heart. But on the side, you know, I enjoy sporting events. I'm a big time basketball player. You can't see my wall, but I have a couple of medals back there. So I continue to play basketball. I love movies, exploring different types of restaurants. So I'm just a regular guy looking to have fun and looking to do great work in this community.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. I got to ask, what are the medals for? Like,
Yeah, I played college basketball, but I've now evolved to the master's level as I age. So I have a couple of gold medals and a couple of silver medals playing in the Masters Nationals.
That's amazing. Well, very cool. Thank you for sharing that bit about your personal life, Eric. All right, so let's get back into questions about Aon. Can you tell us a bit about how you ended up here? Like what drew you to Aon over other opportunities you might have had?
Yeah, great question, Virginia. What drew me to Aon was number one, the last several years, I've been working extremely hard. And that means for me, if I'm going to do any work going forward the next 20 years, it's about my passion. The passion is in affordable housing. We're struggling with this issue nationwide. It's just I'm going to call it a humanitarian crisis we're really dealing with, guys. That's how serious the issue is. But specifically for Aon, Aon takes on tough challenges, right? They have a history of doing that. Some organizations would shy away and say, oh, it's too much for us to take on. And I believe to do the work that's required, you're going to have to be able to stick your chest out and be willing to take on tough challenges. And for me, I spoke to a lot of organizations and I had no interest in talking to anyone else but Aon, quite honestly, because it was about that challenge, taking on the tough issues. And that is what really has me really pumped about the organization.
That's awesome. I love to hear it. I mean, obviously it means a lot to me because I also choose Aon, but love that you have such passion for it. And you're already wearing the gear. So, everyone, he has drunk the Kool-Aid. It's in. That's awesome. Okay. So CJ, who is one of our residents and also one of our board members, submitted this question. Can you tell us about your vision for the future of Aon?
Yeah, CJ, I appreciate that question. Here is what's in my brain, and I hope to build a coalition around what I'm getting ready to describe. At Aon, we do a fabulous job communicating the human story in terms of why housing is important. We want to add to that a powerful economic argument as to why economic issues matter in housing, to be able to draw in and start to change the narrative about what affordable housing really is. So if we're going to go big, which I believe we're going to go big, but it's going to be in the context of a strategy that will help us draw in resources. And I'll say this, beyond traditional government sources. So the vision, as we start to pull it together with the leadership team, onto the board, onto the community, will be about changing the narrative to be able to draw in more resources to support the work. And that's kind of how I see it.
Love it. So in executing that vision and bringing everyone along board, what do you think are going to be some of the biggest challenges you'll face as CEO of Aon?
Well, you know what, guys, changing the narrative. It's not about the organization. It's about changing the narrative and sort of aligning the pieces so we can do great work, right? So when I talk about the narrative being the challenge, there's this misperception about affordable housing. If one were to look at income, look at job growth, compare it to your salary, you'll quickly find you fall in that category. So I think it's about that narrative, but aligning our strategies to match the reality of the situation. So if that makes sense, that's what I really see the challenge is.
Yeah, we certainly have our work cut out for us, which is why it's good that so many of you have joined us in this work. So, so you mentioned earlier that you have a lot of degrees. You are very impressive on paper, I have to say. Can you tell us a little bit about how your educational background shaped what kind of leader you've become today?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I worked at every level. I started my career out as a community organizer, organizing tough neighborhoods to deal with affordable housing and job creation issues at the community level. So I totally understand what's happening at the community level. I've worked at state, local, federal levels. So every step along the way, as I'm getting educated, I'm learning more about what's required to adapt to the changes. So for example, I started out heavily on the government side, right? But as I learned more and more and more, I went on to complete an MBA, graduated from Harvard Graduate School of Design. So for me, the education was always about being able to understand and be able to pivot as you're dealing with these challenges. So some people have said, oh, don't you have enough education? No, probably not. Because what I thought I was getting in my bachelor's, I didn't get. What I got in my master's, I didn't get what I thought I was going to get. Eventually onto my PhD, onto everything else. And I think it has served me well because it has given me a broad sort of understanding, both from education and practical experience. So I'm confident I can pivot in any direction based on my education and my experience.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, you were sort of a unicorn, this ability to have the lived experience, to have done community organizing, and to have these impressive educational credentials. It's just really exciting to see what you'll do.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So this question is from Douglas. What do you think it's going to take to meet the need for affordable homes? How many more homes are needed, and how are we going to get there?
Well, first of all, let me say the numbers are staggering. Staggering is a light term. I was on a call with several commissioners from Ramsey County, and Ramsey County quoted a number of 35,000 in Ramsey County, just in the 30% of area median income population. So the numbers are staggering. I've seen numbers from 105,000. I've seen as low as 50,000. The numbers are staggering, but here's what we're going to do. We know that Aon cannot tackle all of this. So as we're looking at strategy, we're going to carve off a percentage of that sort of market. Let's say, for example, it's 20% of, I'm making a number up in this case, 50,000. We'll tackle 20% of that number and come up with an annual number each year over a 10-year period that we will work to produce. And hopefully the rest of the 80% that's out there, others are starting to come on board to do more work. But the numbers are staggering. You know, I can probably spend 2-3 hours just talking about it. But if you, again, look at median income, look at what people are paying for housing costs. Remember this, guys, even across the country, the median family income in America is only $65,000. So this is a tidal wave of challenges we're facing because there's not the room in the sort of upper market sort of thinking to really deal with this issue. So.
Love it. Denise asks, how can Aon leverage more funds so older apartments can be brought up to a higher standard? I know this is something you've been thinking about a lot as you get to know our properties.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I look at this in buckets. We have our existing portfolio. We have NOAA acquisitions that will continue, tax credits, and looking at a sort of different space we can enter. But back to the question of the existing portfolio, we need to make the case about preserving what we have, right? And what that means is looking collectively, holistically at our portfolio and really making a case for funding that is not tied to refinancing. So understand that point, because what happens on occasion doing your underwriting, there's areas that underwriting won't cover. So it can put Aon in a position where there are elements that are not covered that when we purchase NOAA, for example, we start to find things we didn't know really existed, you know, aging pipes, infrastructure going back to the 1960s. So as we look at the strategy, the existing portfolio has got to be front and center. So we will be focusing on that with a twist towards emphasizing preserving what we have as we are trying to scale upwards.
Love that. Well, since that question brought up the presence of our many residents and the folks who already live in Aon homes, I'm going to jump to one of the Q&A. I'll get back to the pre-submitted questions, but there is Michael. Michael, thanks for joining us. They are a resident at the Rose Apartments. And so first, Eric, Michael says he wants to say congrats on your position. It's nice to see a person of color in a role that's transformative. So that's from Michael. And then his question is, how can he get more involved as a resident? And is there a way that we can communicate? And I wonder if he's meeting you and Michael can communicate.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Let me say this. Our work is not about the building. It's about the people. So as we start to go down this road again, we're currently interviewing for a vice president of Resident Connection Resident Services. And my response to that is we are going to make that piece of our work just as important to purchasing a property. So instead of doing things just like having, a pizza sale or something at the complex, how do we build capacity amongst the residents that ultimately would say, you know what, I started out in this complex, but I moved on and went on to another location, which was, a sort of a higher market rate development because I'm progressing my way through society. So what you're hearing from me is I don't have the answer specifically on that, but I can tell you this: a focus on residents will be at the front of our work. But here's the challenge: the sources of funding are usually tied to government sources, and we know that is a limited source. So whether we're building a new building or even getting into a relationship with third-party vendors or service providers, there's always this shortage. So as we build out this plan, we're going to try and put some metrics and strategy around the importance of services to start to draw in dollars to help us there as well.
That's great. Michael, I'll also just say, if one of my colleagues from Aon can put my email in the chat, you and I can connect and I can make sure that you can get straight to Eric at some point. Yep. Eric's a little busy, as you all might know. He's been here a month and he's got like 30 intro meetings a day. Eventually, he'll hopefully get to meet all of you. But in the meantime, Michael, we can make sure that that connection happens. Okay, back to more questions. Let's see. We've got a question from Heidi, and actually it's echoed by a question that Gretchen submitted today. Hello to both of you. When you look for partners to work with, what do you think makes the ideal collaboration, and who are some of the partners you're hoping to work with?
Yeah, here's what makes the great collaboration. We're on the same page. So example, let's say in a financing deal, if we need low cost money at 1% to 2% to really make it work, sources of funding at 8, 9, 10%, partnering with organizations like that is sort of counter to the mission, right? Same thing on the services side. We have to be able to connect the dots when it comes to understanding what the issues are, right? So if that makes sense, I use that as an example, not to sort of pin the people or organizations that has money that's higher, but what makes good partners is alignment of thought towards addressing the issue. So philanthropic organizations, the banking community, citizen organizations, elected officials, everyone. So during my time in Bloomington, I just have to say to everybody, the amount of education and time we spent with the city council in Bloomington to adopt the housing ordinance in Bloomington was a great feat of collaboration. And actually, Aon was part of that work. Common Bond was a part of the work, PPL. I can go down the list from Doran, developers, everybody. We brought them all to the table. So that's how I tend to look at it, but I always have one request. Let's get in alignment, because if we get the strategic alignment, we can move mountains and we can move it much faster than traditionally known.
Great. Thank you for that. All right, well, and then this is a timely question, another one from Denise. Denise, thanks for all your amazing questions. You talked a little bit about your time in Bloomington. Are there other good practices that you can share from previous roles that would help families with lower incomes find and stay in affordable homes?
Yeah, let me say this. As a community, not just Aon, but we're going to have to find resources that matches the reality, right? Example, during my time in Dallas, we created a $100 million fund with a 1 to 2, 3% 10-year, 15-year fund. I use as an example because that provides greater flexibility to meet the need even at the lower 30%, right? So, but truth being told, my experience is about really working in collaboration, not to go around in a circle and continue to talk, but really figure out a way we can spin off and do some good work, right? So whether it was Bloomington, whether it was Dallas, whether it was other opportunities I've had over my career, what I do find is a way to be creative. So give you an insight in terms of how I see things. Imagine a development that has 60% AMI as their sort of cap.
Eric, can you tell folks who might not be quite as familiar with some of the language around housing, what do you mean by 60% AMI or 30%?
Yeah, so 60%. So the area median income in the Twin Cities is 100, let's say 100,000 or something like that, right? 60% of that is usually the target range. Some developers would say we need to go up to 80%, right? 30% would be sort of 30% of the 100,000 would be the category of 30% AMI income, right? But just to give you a window of how I think, we really started creating this thinking in Bloomington. You know, the numbers around 30% AMI, because let's not make the assumption that everybody needs services at the 30% given what incomes are, right? You could really create a pool of resources to simply inject in a private development the rent difference between a 60% and a 30% to include those in the units, bypassing all of your traditional bureaucracy to get there. So if you hear what I'm saying, I'm talking about innovation and creativity in terms of how we tackle, because we need production and preservation to get to 30%, 60%, 50%, et cetera, et cetera.
That sounds amazing. I want to make sure that I followed it. Are you, I mean, in terms of just like throwing out a creative idea, are you saying that maybe we could have housing where a subsidy is built in for someone at that very low income level?
What I'm saying is, instead of saying to a private developer, I'm going to force you to put 30%, I'm only using 30%, but let's say that their target market for affordable is 80%. And as a collective, we say, okay, we simply want to buy into your project. And I have to tell you guys, in my earlier days in Florida, we actually did this. So instead of saying, you know, we're going to force you, I would say, let's calculate the rent difference for a period of time, let's say 10 years, with a built-in 3 to 4% escalator provided to them upfront in a 10-year grant. Boom, now you've got the 30%, whatever number we decide. It's really, you know, so it's how we take things that are complicated and simplify it. Some people will say, well, we've never seen it before. Well, it doesn't mean it can't be done, right? So that just gives you an idea of how I think about this. And I'm talking about when we did this in Florida, this is along the coast, beachfront property, right? And guess what? That 10-year grant covering the rent difference with the escalator did not impact that developer's pro forma, but yet we got the units. That's just...
Well, I love that you're coming at this with a creative approach. You seem like a numbers guy, so I appreciate that. I am not a numbers girl. So for those who might be a little bit more like me, I'm just really excited that you're coming at this creatively and really thinking about how do you take our current systems and try to make it so that more people earning those very low income levels have access to homes, whether it's on a beach in Florida or on a lake in Minnesota.
but you know what, truthfully, Virginia, it's the inherent built-in frustration of doing this thing the same way over and over and over. And I think everybody listening in that work in this industry will also say, yep, we've been doing this thing the same way. I could probably go back 30, 40, 50 years. It's the same thing. What I'm saying to everybody, let's look at some creative ways to do that. Let's test the boundaries. What do we have to lose? That's all I'm saying.
Love it. All right, well, let's switch tracks a little bit and talk a little bit more about the people. You mentioned that, you know, that's why we exist. That's why Aon is here, is for the residents we serve. And Linda posed this great question. How do you see yourself making yourself available to Aon's residents? If they have concerns, if they're excited, you know, how do you see yourself giving them access to you?
I am open and available anytime. I am open to come to the complex. If you like to cook, I like to eat, so I can come over and we can have a meal together.
I like to eat too. Can I come?
If you're having just a resident gathering or something, feel free to invite me and I will be there. I have no problems doing that. So I'm not this guy that, you know, sees himself like up here above looking down. I'm sort of down here. I want to intermingle with the residents and everyone. So what I would say is reach out. If you got something scheduled, that's fine. You know, if you got a group of people want to have coffee, I'm an early riser, so I have coffee. You know, if you want to have lunch, we can organize that too. So moral of the story is I am open, flexible, and available.
Love it. All right, let's see. I'm going to go to the Q&A. So for those of you who are still have questions, go ahead and submit them in the Q&A. We'll try to get to as many as we can. This one comes from Martha. Martha, nice to have you joining us here today. Martha says, affordable housing can't belong just to the housing providers. What do you think Aon can do, and what can everyone do to get the broader community, businesses, workforce, education, economy, to understand that this issue is critical for all of us?
Yeah, thank you, Martha, for that question. Here's what I really believe. I really believe we have, not just in the Twin Cities, but across the United States, a corporate community sort of on the sidelines. And I'll tell you why. I believe they're on the sidelines because the narrative that they hear is really not the case. Give you an example. Use the name of a program, low-income housing tax credit. NIMBYism will push and say, oh my goodness, I don't want those people in my neighborhood, right? It's those people, you know, that's going to destroy everything. You guys probably heard the narrative, all sorts of reasons you'll come up with. But changing the narrative around the economic impact of affordable housing will get those on the sidelines, I believe, into the game to really help, right? To me, it's very simple economics. The more you spend on housing, the less you're going to be able to help the local economy. So less you're going to be able to help the tax base, things of that nature. So I believe talking and having conversations like that and blending it with the human story begins to change the narrative and begin to give those on the sidelines a reason to get in this game. So Twin Cities, its economic future will be contingent upon housing costs. If we let this thing just run unabated, it will impact this region eventually in the future. And I can tell you guys this, moving from Dallas, I doubled my housing costs. So what I'm saying is we've got to change the narrative, and how we do that as a collective will make a big difference.
That's great. Martha also had the excellent question of where can she get a jacket like yours? Since you're so new, I'm going to take that one for you, Eric. The short answer is you can't. There's some clothes that we reserve only for Aon employees so that our residents on site aren't confused by who works there and who doesn't. But we do sometimes have opportunities to buy Aon swag. And Anna is on our team, and I know paying attention to the chat, so maybe she could put some details in there because I don't even know exactly what our plan is for access to that. But we do have those opportunities once or twice a year sometimes. Okay, we've got an interesting question from Josine. Thanks, Josine. So she says, corporations are now buying up single family homes and renting them back to the public. Do you see Aon moving into single family home ownership preservation?
That is an excellent question. I'll tell you why it's an excellent question. I had a conversation last week with a pretty big national funder, and the question asked was, will Aon consider affordable single family? And I said that given the need for wealth creation in this region, in the state and beyond, it is something we could definitely going to take a look at. Looking at cities in particular that have smaller lots or lots available in their portfolio, I would say it's definitely something we need to take a look at to see how we can create those opportunities. So I don't think anything is going to be off the table.
Cool. Okay, this one, a little bit of a hardball question for you, but really appreciate Reagan's out there from Homeline, which is an excellent organization working on behalf of tenants in town. If you don't know about them, check them out. Reagan asked about, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, asked about how we're investing in our current properties. You already spoke to that a little bit, but has a more specific question that's kind of a hard one. Says that residents were told that 150 units were going to be remodeled at Blooming Meadows South, but that didn't happen, that the money went to something else. Can you speak, do you know about that, or why that is, or where Reagan and residents working with Reagan could go for more answers?
Yeah, no, Reagan, appreciate that question. Our asset management team, in combination with our housing development team, is really looking at that strategy. And what you're hearing is preserving units, acquiring units, and ultimately seeing what's behind the curtain after you get it is something that Aon is really become significantly enlightened to. So in the scenario describing, items that we just didn't know about existed that we had to pivot and really take care of. Example, plumbing, piping issues, boiler issues, things you just don't see. So what's happening is they're taking a good look at how to pivot to ultimately get to the units. So what I would say is, if you want to have a further conversation, don't hesitate to reach out to me and we can coordinate something with the team at Aon and have a further conversation, get clarity on where things are going.
That's great. And Reagan also put in the chat that it sounds like a group of residents from Blooming Meadows would love the opportunity to meet with you. So Reagan, hopefully my email ended up in the chat somewhere. Aon team, if it hasn't, can you make sure it goes there? Why don't you get in touch with me and we'll make sure that that meeting happens. We can absolutely set that up. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. Oh, this is a good one from Bob. A little bit, we're changing tracks again. How will Aon navigate the future given the division and polarization in America?
Yeah, well, I can tell you this, we are not going to be part of the problem. How about that? So here's what I believe. Just like challenges, there are great opportunities. We have a great opportunity to help lead, build further collaboration, to deal with issues in the community. Housing is at the forefront basically of everything. You read housing policy and you look at how inequality has formulated in American cities, you will find housing at the core. So for us, don't look for us to be the problem. Look for us to be part of the solution. That's really what I have to say about that. Let me give you a great example. As we're building out the new focus on resident connections, resident services, why couldn't we look at employment of residents to do construction work? Why can't we look at things like that? We can't solve all the problems, but we can look at how we can build collaborations to solve the problem, right? So I would tell you this, I don't think there's anybody on the leadership team that will say we're going to go counter to that. Our challenge will be, again, correcting for some systems, getting our strategy right. So when we're making our move, it's a well-coordinated strategy going forward.
I do know that I was in a conversation with you and some others the other day, and we were talking about, it's in session right now, and so we're working on some advocacy efforts that might make some changes that are important to Aon and to the people it serves. And there was a little bit of strategizing and some assumptions being made about which side of the aisle would be more supportive of what we were interested in. And you were quick to be like, I don't care which side of the aisle they're on. I just want their money, and we need to talk to them about why it's important, and they're all going to agree. And I really appreciate it. You're like, that's not even part of the conversation. The conversation is, here's why housing is important for all of us, to go back to Martha's question, and that's why we have to work on this together.
Yeah, no, Virginia, just let me add to that, because that's a great comment. Housing is not a left, right, or center issue. It is the issue. So if you're a Democrat, you're probably suffering in housing. If you're Republicans, you're probably suffering in housing. So for us, we won't turn our back and say, oh, well, you're of this political persuasion, we're not going to talk to you. So we're going to go at it in every way, shape, or form. There is no barriers in terms of discussions around what the need is and how collectively as a community we work together to solve it.
Love that. All right, let's see what questions we've got now. Where do we want to go? So there's another question from Marie. Marie, I think you're here. This was submitted early. But many of you know that crime has been on the rise, not just in the Twin Cities, but across the country. We've been in an economic downturn, and there's just a lot going on in our communities. But certainly we've seen problems at some of our properties, right, Eric? Can you talk a little bit about what we're trying to do to improve security and what your thoughts on how we can do better at that?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, because when it comes to, let's take our properties as an example, and I'm quite sure others are dealing with it. It's not so much the residents, it's what's happening on the exterior, putting pressure on the complex, right, on our various complexes. So I'll be honest with everybody, this is not a matter of just spending security dollars to solve the problem, right? Because that is sort of like pouring it down the hole. And I can tell you some early conversations we've been having about this. The idea would be, I won't name the community, but we have a community where we own significant properties. We are now thinking about how do we do community organizing, working with the collective interests in that community to start to deal with the issues. So we have, hundreds of units in this area. There's others, there's businesses. So quite honestly, guys, we're gonna have to look at it almost from a community organizing, rehabilitation sort of perspective. However, it won't stop us from going after resources to find some money for security in the interim as we're building out these types of strategies.
Right. Thanks for that. I know it's been something that our team has been talking about a lot as we all struggle to figure out
Yep.
how to make things better. Don has a great question. Thanks, Don, for the question, and glad to see your name here. Minnesota is a great place to live as long as you're white. People of color have a very different experience living in this state. How do you think this impacts the issue of affordable housing?
Well, one, to not make the issue just about people of color. the numbers just don't add up that way, right? Simply put, the numbers of minority individuals of color in Minnesota are significantly lower than those that are not color. To me, part of the answer is making it about the issue of income and what people can afford. Take the race issue out of the equation, which is hard, I must admit, but it goes back to that narrative in terms of speaking about it differently to start to change that, right? And that's really what I would say, because the income numbers are just devastating numbers when you look at it and look at the increase in housing costs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting way to approach it because, we do know that in this state, the renter households, particularly, so lower income households, are disproportionately represented by people of color. So I think the numbers are something like if it's 1 in 5 white folks is renting versus owning, it's like 1 in 3, I think, Black folks, and there's different stats for people who are Indigenous or people who are of Asian descent. So there's certainly race issues at play in all of that.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks for the question, Don. Okay, well, let's lighten it up a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about how your family's doing moving here? Like, what do you all like about living in Minnesota, living in the Twin Cities?
Well, I came from Texas. No, don't get me started on Texas. First of all, we settled in very well. My son has adjusted. My wife has adjusted. We have a now 5-month-old chocolate lab. He's just full of excitement. So I have to tell you, it's been a really good transition. No problems, no issues to really complain about. I'm waiting for the snow to melt so we can see the beautiful greenery around the region. But what really excites me about being back is the opportunity to work with Aon and work with this community collectively to deal with this issue. And if we do this right, we can sort of turn the narrative that's being talked about in terms of the Twin Cities around the country. The narrative about this region now has gone from a place you want to come and do business to a place you may want to stay away from. And I think that the collective work we do together can start to change that narrative. So on the personal side, everything is coming along very well. On the professional side, I'm just excited. So that's what I can say. That's
great. Well, and then talking about communities, this is an anonymous question that came in. You mentioned NIMBYism earlier, and for those who don't know, that's an acronym for Not in My Backyard, which is sort of how you talk about communities that are like, yes, we love affordable housing, but not in my neighborhood. So someone has asked, where do you think that not in my backyard attitude about affordable housing comes from, and how can we help change those beliefs?
Yeah, great, excellent question. Where it comes from is the early days of public housing and the narrative and the imagery of low-income housing. That narrative and the lack of definition of affordable housing, depending on what community you go to, some people call it attainable, sustainable, affordable, workforce, whatever. That piece going back decades has created this sort of narrative. So when people hear affordable housing, boom, immediately they think, oh my goodness, projects in Chicago, whatever is coming to my neighborhood. That is what they basically think. Now, here's the answer to that. In every slide of development that we do, and we did this in Dallas, we show incomes of the individuals that are going to be living in the complex. So in the tax credit project, that's not poverty rents. That's not what people think in terms of the visual of historic narratives around affordable housing. So up front, we need to attack that by saying, we've got a complex that's got 60% of area median income we talked about. The income on that, guys, that's not someone making, $100 a month or, living off of zero. Those numbers are pretty significant. So, but to your question, that's where the narrative comes from. And that is basically what we're fighting against. And I'll tell you why. I was in Starbucks 2 weeks ago and getting my coffee. Lady comes up to me, say, hey, how you doing? What are you doing? What do you do? Told her what I was doing. And she said, oh, wow, those people need housing. She said, those people need housing. And I said to her, oh, hey, so what do you do for a living? She said, I'm a school teacher. And I said, if you don't mind me asking, are you like multiple income households? She said, no, it's just me. I'm a teacher. And I said, you know what? You are who we're talking about. I know what teachers make. You see it on the news right now, right? For example, you know what they make. And I said to her, that narrative you're describing is part of the problem that creates an NIMBYism because everybody's freaking out because they think something horrible. Sad thing about it is, once the developments are up, people tend to change and say, oh my goodness, that's a great development. Can we have more of those in our community?
Yeah, that's a great example. And what a fascinating conversation to have. But I think of the intersection in Minneapolis at Franklin and Portland, where 20 years ago, it was not a nice place to be and people sort of stayed away from it. And in partnership with Hope Community, another amazing nonprofit that we work with, we helped develop that entire corridor. And now it's this thriving community. You drive through there and it's lovely. The buildings are all nice. There's families out there. And that is all affordable housing.
Yep.
So yeah, great point. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Oh, this is a good one. What has surprised you during your first month at Aon?
Well, I'll tell you what has surprised me. Not so much about Aon per se. It's not about Aon. What has surprised me is, well, it shouldn't have surprised me, is the level of despair I'm picking up in the community. That right there, guys, you can see it, you can feel it. And that piece right there shouldn't really be the case. That's really disappointing. You can see it in people as they're walking around. You can see it everywhere. And just in conversations, I don't hesitate to stop someone and have a conversation about how they're feeling about that feeling thing, which is going to the negative, is something that really has stuck out, so that's what it is.
Well, thank you. All right, Doug's got some questions here. I'm gonna just thank you, Doug, for the questions. Let's not get too wonky though, because already the question's a little over my head. But Doug is asking about what's the change you'd like to see in the uses of infrastructure bond funds to support deeply affordable units and mixed income buildings? So buildings with a lot of different levels of income from residents and the bonds, which are from the government that help fund that.
Yeah, great question. Logic goes that it's better to have a mix of incomes in a development versus, a standalone, isolated sort of development for people making less in terms of income. That logic makes sense. Here's the challenge. If you open that or you expand that number up too high, then you're going to open it up to a world of developers who will see that as a source. And let's say 80% of area median income. That's usually the target the upper market developers will want to shoot for. And make no mistake about it, the game of real estate is about other people's money. So you would have a scenario where they would go full blown after those resources, and they would tend to target more of that 80, maybe the 60. So it's about figuring out that balance in terms of how it's utilized. And I'll tell you this too, I'm also a believer that, first of all, there's no such thing as a market. There's multiple levels in the market. For those developers who want to focus at the higher level, that's what they want to do, let them do that. Our resources need to be aligned with developers and nonprofits, whatever, that is taking on the challenge, guys. Why force something that there is no interest? Some would say, well, we have to do that. But if it's about profit maximization, you're going to lose that battle. So what I'm really saying is separation, isolation, units by themselves, that's old school 1960s, 1970s sort of thinking. Mixed income with individuals 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever is really how it should be. But the challenge is, how do you fend off those that will try and say, change it at this higher level, because that's affordable too, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It sort of did. But I appreciate that. And I'm so glad that you do what you do and I get to do what I do, and we'll just stay in our lanes. But Doug had another question, and this one is, I think, one that's interesting to so many, and will make more sense to me, is, one of the sort of mixed income projects we're working on is something we call the St. Olaf Project. For those of you who don't know, it was written up in the news, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 months ago, but we're trying to do a development in downtown Minneapolis near the St. Olaf Church, which is why we call it right now the St. Olaf Project. Can you give us an update on that project?
Well, the latest update on that is, and Sarah Harris is not here, but she can give you the full-blown detail. But what we're looking at is really the sources and uses, quite honestly, and really determining ultimately what the financial gap is going to be, because we do want to be able to serve and help those at the lower end in tandem with a certain percentage on the higher end, but without breaking that ceiling. So what we're trying to figure out really is that balance there, but it comes down to sources. If we can identify a different source, I think we can solve the problem. So that's really where we are right now.
Yeah, and that is language that I understand well. We need more money. So just a reminder, aon.org/donate. Okay, thanks for the questions, Doug. Those were great. And for your work with us. Okay, this is a good one because it's really relevant, particularly in Minneapolis and St. Paul right now, a question about rent control. So rent control has been seen as a way to keep families from being displaced so they can, keep affording their apartment. What do you think are some of the unintended consequences you've seen or heard of with rent control? And what do you think can be done to keep families housed and also keep development going? I think some of us have heard, there's some concerns from the development committee, which we're a part of, about too strict of rent control.
Yeah, so unintended consequences of rent control is usually a slowdown in production, because some will say, well, if I can't get an annual increase in rents above the 3%, I need it to be at 5%, then I won't choose that community. That's really sort of the argument. But then the argument for rent control is, well, the upper market, because I won't say the market because there's no such thing, the upper market is not producing. So there's this pressure to say, my goodness, do something. Do I believe there's somewhere in the middle to address this issue? Absolutely. I can tell you what I personally think about how we should look at this. I've worked in cities where I say to cities all the time, all developers are not the same. There's no such thing as a singular developer. Developers have different financial performance metrics. Find those that are aligned with what you want to do, provide your support there. Don't go in a direction where those who don't want to do it. To me, in the simplest way, that's how we should probably start to look at it. So I think this is going to be an ongoing debate, because what do you do if wages are not matching the cost of housing? I mean, I've seen numbers, guys, where people making $100-something thousand a year in certain regions of the country still can't afford the housing. So something's not right there, guys. We have to be smart enough to figure this thing out. That's what I'll say about it. I know there'll be more discussions on this issue.
For sure. Thanks for that. And thanks for the question. This next one's from Mary. Thanks for your question, Mary. Do you see Aon having a role in chronic homelessness in the Twin Cities, or is that not a focus of ours? And she just says that she appreciates these sessions to learn more about the work that we're doing. So thanks, Mary, for that.
Yeah, Aon has a role in this space, and we do have properties where we provide support for homeless members of our society trying to make the transition. So the key to that, guys, is always, again, the support dollars needed for individuals coming out of homeless and helping them, which is a source of resources that is very limited. So look for us to continue to operate in that space. We'll do as much as we can, but we've got to find on the services side really to help in that arena.
Well, and this maybe gets to a question that Greg asked. And so maybe you've already touched it, but do you have anything else to say about how Aon addresses additional needs from our residents, such as mental health or chemical dependency or anything like that?
Yeah, let me say this. We're going to do a reboot on that strategy, right? And what I mean by rebooting is, you heard me say earlier about having an acute focus on those needs. So we partner with a lot of service providers. I want to say 15, 16 service providers we actually partner with. We'll continue those partnerships, but truthfully, guys, it's going to be about finding additional resources to ramp up that provision related to what we do in terms of our mission. That's what it's really going to come down to, which I can tell you is a priority for me personally. And we will keep that at the forefront. Because remember I said, it's not about the building, it's about the people. So let's just remember that.
Okay, this is so great, Eric. Really, I know I can speak for others. I'm going to speak for you all. I hope it's okay, but it's just fantastic to hear straight from you, sort of how you're feeling about Aon and its future and how we do our work. So we probably have time for just a couple more questions. So this is your last chance for those who are listening in. If you'd like to submit a question in the Q&A, we might be able to get a couple more in there. And while we're seeing if any other questions come in, I've got kind of a tough one and maybe a little more lighthearted one. This one is, what is it that keeps you up at night about the work we do?
I tell you what keeps me up. I just don't know, guys, how people are going to actually continue to make it, given the rising cost of everything, and ultimately what that's going to mean in the final analysis for our communities. That piece right there has me thinking about, we need to figure this out as a community, because the alternative is not a good alternative. So, and I'm guys, look, I'm not talking about people trying to take advantage of the system. I'm talking about people that's getting up every single day, trying to make their way in society. They're doing what they get. They turn left, right, up, down, and they find like, oh my goodness, I can't even afford a simple place to live. That right there is something that is sort of on my mind every single day, because to deal with this issue, I believe, will help so many other issues. The research related to education, the research related to economic growth, all of it is wrapped in housing. So that's the one thing that keeps me just like constantly thinking about, we got to deal with this. So that's what it is.
All right. Let's see. Well, a little bit lighter note. Can you talk a little bit about, so you've just moved here from Dallas. It's, I think, a little bit colder here. Do you have any vacation plans or places that you like to go when you need to get away from town and hopefully sleep a little better at night?
Well, you know what? I'm a big food guy. So I got to head back down to New Orleans, grab a couple of some gumbo, some crawfish or something. That's really what I want to do. So spring break, my son will have spring break. We'll probably take a long weekend or something and do something like that. But outside of that, that's kind of what I see right now.
You're speaking my soul there. Crawfish etouffee is like the best food in the universe.
There you go. Yeah.
All right, let's see. I think we can do maybe one or two more questions. This question is from Michelle. Thanks, Michelle, for being here and for the question. Do we partner with workforce development organizations for our residents?
I would have to dig further into that in terms of what's been provided on the service provision side. But I can tell you if we haven't, we need to. We need to do that. I said earlier, I've had the opportunity to create resident-led construction programs, workforce development strategies, incubators, all sorts of stuff. So I can tell you that is something we're going to be definitely looking at, because I talked about the economic impact of housing, which all of this lends to that argument. So as we bring our new VP on board, working with the leadership team and everyone else, that's going to be part of the strategy.
That's great. And I can just add to that we don't currently have any programs like that in place, although certainly our resident services team is connecting individual residents with opportunities, but it's a little bit more ad hoc. Okay, well, that is bringing us to our last question of the day for you, Eric, and it's really just a little bit of an uplift about what is coming up with Aon for Aon in terms of new projects. What can people see coming from us soon in terms of more affordable homes?
Yeah, what you're going to see coming from us, we're actually in the process of building our pipeline right now. You'll see additional NOAA acquisitions. Of course, we're going to always do tax credit projects. We talked about St. Olaf. There's a couple other projects out there that's going to be emerging depending on the tax credit cycle. So don't look for us to go dormant in no way, shape, or form, but look for us to do some sort of tweaking to better position our strength as we do more development. And I can say this too, a space that we're looking at in terms of where I believe holds great potential is the non-tax credit space, right? How do we enter that space and produce housing that's not so much just tied to tax credit? So I would just say stay tuned for everybody. And as always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
That's great. Well, and for those who are interested, our next grand opening, it's going to be a virtual one, will be for our property in Edina. So that's 70 units right near Southdale, if you're familiar with that community. And I believe that's happening in April. I could be a little off on that timing. But so look for messages in your email and your mailbox for invitations to that virtual event. All right, with that, let's close things up. We're at the end of this time together. Thank you so much for being here. Eric, thank you for your candor and your openness to just answering whatever questions we might throw at you today. And to all of you who are with us, thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions and thank you for your support. You are a critical part of this work. And it is so important for all of us that we figure out a way to find more homes that people can afford. I hope you'll all join us for our next event. On May 5th, we're going to be gathering in person and virtually through a live stream for our Beyond Bricks and Mortar breakfast, which we haven't done for 2 years because of the pandemic. So we're excited to see some of you in person again. And of course, as I mentioned, you can always make a gift today, tomorrow, or any day at aon.org/donate. We do need everyone's participation in making this happen. And with that, we will end our time together today. Thanks again, Eric. Thanks again to everyone who is here. It's been a very fun lunch hour. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Bye.
Bye.